Good evening. Welcome to the Magic Library. If you're out there, check in, say hello. More scary stories and bourbon from yours truly in the Magic Library in Louisville. Hey, Donnie. Hey, Mitzi. Charles, how's it going? Michelle, good to see you. Beth, Mitzi. Hey, Lori. Stacy, hi. Hey, Susan. Yeah, if you're checking in, let us know where you're from. Hey, Patricia. Let us know what you're drinking. So this is 13th night together, right? So it's the second night of Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. There's Amanda, Eileen, Sonia, hi. Becky, good to see you. Hey, Andrew, how are you doing? Hope everyone had a good day today. Hey, Susan. Anything exciting? Hey, Steve, to report? Yeah. Well, people who've been to my house or have been to Thursday/Monday/Tuesday night dinner club will be happy to see who I've got tonight. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Claudia. Mike. So this is Our Lady of Perpetual Inebriation. She was always a regular at our dinner parties. In the butler's pantry, there was an old telephone alcove where I put her on that. And we lit candles whenever we had dinner parties. Whenever we go to Slade, do our yearly get-togethers, we always bring her along. So it's an old saint, Virgin Mary, actually. You can see the blue on her. Usually that blue paint is a sign of the Virgin Mary on her cape. But this I found in an antique shop, like from the 1700s, South America probably they think it is. But yeah, so she's gonna be with us tonight. So yeah, if you're just checking in, let people know where you're from. Say hi. Also, I don't know if you know this, but you can check in at David's Magic Library on Facebook. So check in at David's Magic Library. Hey, Deanna. And this is an old Virgin Mary statue. We called her Our Lady of Perpetual Inebriation at our dinner parties. Hey, Barb, Jessica, Diane. So check in at David's Magic Library. And we're going to continue our reading and discussion of Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. So yesterday we read the first couple chapters. Tonight we're going to continue with another couple chapters. Hey, Dorothy, Stephanie, Suzanne, Sylvia. Okay, so we kind of left off with a cliffhanger last night. The first couple chapters of the book, Ramon and I had moved into the old Widmer house at 1228 South 3rd Street. It was a Chateau-esque house. I discovered it was built around 1895 for a man named Jacob Widmer, so we found out a little about the house's history last night. And strange things started to happen. The Christmas tree kept falling over. We kept hearing strange crashes in the middle of the night. And hey, Dolly and Lisa. And the last chapter we read, I was down in I had been up in my office on the 3rd floor doing research on the house, and I went down to make some tea, and I kept hearing Ramon walking up and down the hallway upstairs, and I was wondering what he was doing. And then I started hearing him move furniture around on the floor above me in the room that was above the kitchen. Hey, Abby. And so we left off where I was in the kitchen making some tea. I had a kettle of water getting ready to boil. Ramon was upstairs moving things around, and all of a sudden I heard something at the back door, and I looked, and the door handle was moving. Someone was trying to get in the back door. Hey, Rebecca. Hey, Doug. Hey, Jeffrey. Hey, Lisa. So that's where we left off. The last line or two was, but that was nothing like the fright I got when the knob on the back door rattled and began to turn. Somebody was trying to get in. So that leads us to our next chapter, Something in the Basement. The door suddenly opened, filling the kitchen with a gust of icy air, and in walked Ramon, out of the cold and bluster. Relieved, I watched as Rocky and Bess bounded in after him and began dancing around for the usual post-walk treat. After closing the door, he unhooked the dogs from their leads and fished out 2 biscuits from a basket on the counter. He hung the leashes from a nearby hook and went to the coat rack to hang up his jacket. That's when I remembered the footsteps on the floor above. Wait, what? I slowly looked up at the ceiling, thinking about the scraping noises in the little room overhead. Several hairs stood up on the back of my neck, triggering a rash of goosebumps that traveled down my spine. What were you saying? Ramon returned from hanging his coat and poured hot water into the pot and added tea leaves. Good. I could use a cup of tea. It's cold out there. Where were you? I asked, my eyes darting back to the ceiling. I took the dogs out for a walk, he said matter-of-factly. The usual route. He stirred the tea and put the cover back on the pot. How long were you gone? I turned, crossed through the next room, and started to go up the back stairs. Half an hour or so, he called out. I took them through the park and around the fountain at St. James Court like we always do. Why? What's going on? At the top, I bent over the railing and shouted down to the kitchen. Well, while you were gone, it sounded like someone was walking around up here and moving things in the little bedroom. I walked down the hall and opened the door to the back room. I flicked on the light and poked my head inside, but nothing appeared out of place. Although I had just changed the bulb, there was a rapid flickering, and then the light burned out. I went to the mantel and turned the light on there. Ramon walked up behind me, a cup of tea in hand. Are you sure it was steps? Well, that's what it sounded like. I opened the closet door and looked inside. Then I looked out the back window. Finally, I turned off the light and closed the door. And I could have sworn someone was in that room, moving the furniture around. I could hear something scraping on the floor, like someone was pushing or pulling it. Probably the house settling or something like that. You know what they say about old places. Ramon walked back to the TV in the big room at the front of the house and resumed the movie he had started. Rocky and Bess emerged at the top of the stairs and joined him on the sofa, where they eventually curled up and dozed. I mumbled to myself, looking over my shoulder to the solitary door at the end of the hallway. Let's hope so. I returned to the kitchen to retrieve my pot of tea and took it back to the 3rd floor. Outside, the wind was howling, and it whistled and whipped around the corners of the house. Christmas came, and it seemed that the house would burst with a steady stream of family, friends, and out-of-town visitors that didn't abate until the holiday decorations came down on the 6th of January. My weekly dinner friends came over that night, and we had a taking down the tree party with more recipes I was testing for the new cookbook. The dreary weather that followed in the next 2 weeks provided ample opportunity for our group to gather in front of the fire in the parlor, and it seemed that Widmer House had effortlessly transformed itself into a familiar friend. Nonetheless, I looked forward to the warm weather right around the corner, not only for the pleasant temperatures, but also for the chance to do some major work on the house. 3 rooms still sat practically untouched, for the most part, in need of furniture, wallpaper, and drapes, and I couldn't wait to tear up the outdated shade carpeting that covered the entire 2nd floor. From what I could tell, all the original hardwood flooring was still there, but it would be a major project to sand and refinish them all. The crumbling facade would most likely have to wait a while, perhaps till the following year, by which time I would have scoured antique shops for the right light fixtures and furnishings for the interior of the house. I was standing in the foyer one afternoon in January, deciding where to put an old rosewood settee when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, noticing how blue the cloudless sky seemed that day. It was my friend Jill, another former co-worker from my days waiting tables at the Oak Room down at the Seelbach Hotel. She was passing by and wanted to say hello, so I took her into the front parlor. A pot of freshly brewed tea sat on the sideboard, and I poured her a cup as we began to chat. And I think Jill is on here tonight, so Jill, if you're on, say hi. "Who is that weird guy out front?" she asked, taking a sip of tea. "What weird guy? We've got quite a few down here in old Louisville." I passed her a plate with a piece of apple cake I had made earlier in the day. "That old guy out front," she said. "He was just standing on the sidewalk, staring at the place." "I didn't notice any guy in particular," I said, "but there are lots of them down around here. Probably one of the men looking for work at the day laborer place around the corner." "Maybe." She bit into a forkful of cake and smiled. "But it's odd because he looked exactly like this old Cajun guy I used to see down here all the time when I studied at the University of Louisville." There's Jill. Say hi. "How did you know he was a Cajun?" I sat back and pulled Rocky closer to me. Bess lay on the floor, curled up in front of the fireplace. "I don't really know that he was a Cajun," she said, "but he had that look, kind of dark and swarthy, and he had a different kind of accent." "Really? So what made him so memorable, other than the fact that he was a displaced Cajun in Kentucky?" I drained the last of my tea from the cup and set it down on the saucer. "Well, there was this one time in particular," she began. "The day before, my boyfriend and I had visited the library on York Street where I'd found this huge ledger of old wives' tales and witchcraft and stuff like that, all stuff from Kentucky back in the 1800s. "Okay, so where does the Cajun guy come in?" I leaned forward and poured myself another cup of tea. A fat squirrel scampered onto the window ledge outside and peered in at us. Rocky's ears perked up as he let out a low growl. "Well, it's sort of weird. I read this creepy warning that you should not sweep at night because you might sweep up the spirits," she said. I didn't think much of it, but the next night, right before the sun went down, I decided to sweep the dead leaves from my front porch where we were living over on 2nd Street. I'd totally forgotten about the story I had read. "And?" I pushed another piece of cake in her direction. The squirrel bounded off the window ledge, and Rocky jumped down from my lap and ran to the window where he stood on his hind legs and barked a warning. Well, I'd glance up every few sweeps to see what was going on out on the street, and I looked up to see this old man gliding by with the setting sun shining at his back. But the thing is, it didn't look like he was walking at all. He seemed to be floating. "So what did he do?" "He didn't really do anything," she said, "but he stopped when he saw me looking at him, and then in this eerie Cajun dialect, he said very deliberately, 'It is bad to sweep in the night.'" "It is bad to sweep in the night?" "Yes," and I thought it was really strange because I had just read about it the day before. I tried to be friendly. I told him I had only a few more leaves to sweep up, and you know what he said? Shaking my head, I cupped the tea between my hands. "Well," the old guy stopped short, turned his head in my direction, and repeated his warning in that thick accent of his. "But it is bad to sweep in the night," he said. "Yeah, I suppose that is kind of creepy." "It was odd." She nodded and sat back against a cushion. A gold tooth flashed from his grin, and I totally was mesmerized by his glare. I thought about it for a minute and said, "You're right, I'm done." I turned to go inside, but when I looked back 3 seconds later to say goodbye to him, no one was there. So he just disappeared. Well, I don't know, but curiosity made me walk to the sidewalk and look both ways. There was an empty lot next door, and a man couldn't have shot out of sight so quickly. I looked to the other side, and I still saw no one. It was really freaky. "So did you find out what happened to him?" "No, but I would see him every now and then. It always seemed like he'd be gone when I looked back. I always wondered if it wasn't a spirit that I swept up." "Well, he seems to be reappearing," I said, "if that's who was standing out front just now." "Yeah, maybe, but you know what?" She looked out the window to the sidewalk in front of the house. "As I was walking up your front steps after I saw him, it dawned on me that he was the old Cajun guy, so I turned back to look at him, Let me guess, I said. When you look back, there was nobody there. Yes! Her eyes widened as she said it. It couldn't have been more than a second or two. So where did he go? Yeah, but, people tend to lurk around in old Louisville. I think it has something to do with us being so close to downtown. We get more than our share of crazies. I wish we could send some of them to the East End. Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. They could use a colorful character or two out there, she said. But it was still odd nonetheless. Make sure you keep an eye out for that guy. I will, I said. Maybe there's some voodoo going on in old Louisville that we don't know about, and maybe he has something to do with it. Jill took another bite of cake and laughed. Watch out for little dolls with pins sticking out of them, showing up on your front steps. If I find something like that, I said, it will probably be Ramon who did it. Later that evening, I was at home alone, and thankful the day was almost over. I taught in the morning, and most of the afternoon was spent cleaning and organizing. The day before, I had moved a small sofa and several chairs into the butler's pantry, along with the TV, and it had been transformed into an inviting little nook. Under a blanket on the sofa, with the dogs on their cushions on the floor, I looked forward to a quiet evening watching the History Channel and the Food Network. As I flipped through the channels, it seemed that something rattled the small door leading down to the basement. Sitting up, I turned off the volume and listened intently, but nothing happened. After a minute's silence, I put the sound back on. Rocky and Bess hadn't given any indication that they had heard noise, so no big deal. I continued pressing buttons on the remote control and finally settled on a show about haunted houses. After several minutes, I could hear some kind of noise. It sounded like maybe someone had grabbed the door handle from the other side and had tried to slowly pull the basement door open. I muted the TV and listened carefully, but nothing could be heard. Perhaps it was a draft causing the old door to rattle. Not overly concerned, I returned my attention to the television set and unmuted the volume. There was supposed to be a documentary about Bigfoot coming on next, and I love Bigfoot. After another 15 minutes or so, I had stopped thinking about the rattling of the basement door when a distinct audible noise rattled it again, and an apparent whoosh of air caused one of the curtains behind the TV to lift a bit and flutter briefly before settling back down. I turned off the volume and started to push back the blanket so I could go and check the door when the dogs suddenly stood up and shook themselves awake. After several good shakes, they scanned the room and then raised their heads to look at me. Both of them had cocked their heads to the side and gazed at me with mild perplexion. Yeah, I think they did, Michelle. They sensed some spirits. You need to go outside? I said to the dogs. But instead of erupting in a whirlwind of happy jumps, they stood and stared at me with their heads inclined somewhat to the left. I started to get up from the couch and head for the back door when I realized they hadn't been staring at me, but rather at something behind me. I turned around to see what had captured their attention, but there was nothing there, save for a bare spot of wall where their eyes were focused. It was where the pictures had kept falling. Intrigued, I noticed that when I rose from the sofa and positioned myself next to the dogs, neither of them moved their eyes from the wall. You need to go for a walk? I asked again, a little louder, but nothing seemed to faze them. I suddenly felt a distinct change in the air, almost as if an electrical charge had atomized the atmosphere. You're only freaking yourself out, I mumbled, not totally convinced this was true, as I walked into the kitchen. I grabbed a sandwich from the refrigerator and returned to the little TV room so I could find Rocky and Bess. They were in the same position, their eyes glued to the wall behind the sofa. After several seconds, they both turned their heads to the left and appeared to follow something with their eyes. I saw nothing myself, but their eyes seemed to be following an invisible form as it made its way through to the little door under the back stairs. Bess, curious as ever, trotted over to the door and leaned down to have a sniff at the threshold. Not satisfied with her olfactory explorations, she reached out a paw and started to scratch at the thin crack under the door. Somehow, I wasn't surprised when the door suddenly began to rattle in its frame. However, I was taken aback when Bess suddenly withdrew from the door and quickly scooted backward toward me, evidently startled by something. Then she deliberately turned and looked up at me, a confused look on her face, as the fur on her back and sides slowly lifted and stood on its ends. She gradually rolled her eyes up to see why the hair on top of her head was standing straight up, and then she quickly shook her hair back down and ran to me, standing so I could pick her up. "Hey, Joni Gooden." Rocky looked on, a puzzled look on his face as well. This time, when I asked them if they wanted to go outside, their floppy ears perked up and their wagging tails let me know they did not want to be in that room any longer. After letting them outside, I went to the door under the stairs and opened it. Only darkness greeted me until I turned on the light that illuminated the narrow wooden stairs leading into the cellar. I was tempted to go down and snoop around the brick and limestone rooms for a bit, but I decided to save it for another day. Apart from the washer and dryer, there wasn't much down there besides storage boxes and a few odds and ends left behind by the previous occupants. Even if I didn't believe in ghosts, I didn't relish the idea of being down there all by myself either. I was discovering that being alone in a big old house had its spooky moments now and then, especially at night. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. I'm going to take a little break, and then I'll read another short little chapter before we call it a night. But thanks again for tuning in. If you're just tuning in, let us know what you're drinking. I'm back to Evan Williams tonight. Cheers, everyone. And check in at the Magic Library, David's Magic Library, on Facebook. You can also check in at La Casa Fabulosa. So that's what we're doing tonight. We're continuing our reading and discussion of La Casa Fabulosa. So while we're taking a little break, now's the time to ask questions if anyone's got questions. And by the way, I got my two little pictures of Rocky and Bess here with me tonight. That's Rocky. And that's Bess. I'll show you a picture of Fritz later on. But yeah, so when you're hearing about Rocky and Bess, that's them. So, hey, Helena, Becky. Yeah, good seeing familiar faces back again. Good seeing some new faces. Hey, Ashley. She's only drinking Coca-Cola tonight. All right. So Susan's got 1792. That's nice. Jeffrey's got red wine. All right. So any questions before we read our next little section and then call it a night? So you notice tonight I put light on me. Does it help? Yeah. So I'm going to get a quick drink. And if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and start our second section. Hey, Aaron. So good to see some of my German students, or former German students, on here tonight. All right, so the next chapter, it's like 5 pages. This is what we're going to finish with. We are going to read Ghosts for Dinner. Yeah, Lisa, exactly. They look like old men, our little schnauzers. Okay. So here, hey Veronica, good to see you. So, Ghosts for Dinner. Although I was perfectly content with 2 dogs and a cat, Ramon decided he wanted another rescue schnauzer. On a cold day of drizzle and gray clouds in February, I walked into the front parlor and found a little silver schnauzer by the name of Fritz. He was obviously overcome by his new surroundings and looked timidly up at me, but once I knelt down and put a hand out for him to sniff, he bounded to me. After several minutes of pats and belly rubs, he had won me over, and from that point forward, there were few times when Fritz wasn't at my side in Widmer House. To celebrate Fritz's arrival, and because February was cold and dreary, I decided it was time for a dinner party. It would serve as the official welcome to the new house, and I would make it a long, drawn-out affair with many courses in homage to the home's Victorian past. I would serve smoked salmon and toast points to start with, and then we'd move on to a cream of asparagus soup. Both would be served with champagne. After that, we'd open a bottle of Chardonnay and move on to broiled trout with creamed spinach, and then have sliced turkey with chestnut dressing. After taking a break in the parlor for a cup of punch romaine, we'd return to the table and enjoy beef tenderloin with bordelaise sauce and roast potatoes, all washed down with a nice bottle of claret. To finish the extravaganza, there would be a cheese plate, orange soufflés, and cherry tart with sauternes. Back in the parlor, we'd linger over bourbon and chocolates in front of a blazing fire. Cold, dreary months did have their advantages. In the dining room, I stood and looked at the table, satisfied with my handiwork. The table had green skirting and a green cream-covered jacquard cloth draped over it, and 8 high-backed chairs had been arranged around it. Each place setting had a gold charger with various gilt-rimmed plates of descending sizes stacked on top. On the smallest plate, I'd placed printed linen napkins folded in the shape of the fleur-de-lis, an appropriate symbol for Louisville. With nice silverware and wine glasses and 2 large silver candelabra in the center, the setting looked splendid. When I got up in the morning, all I'd have to do was worry about the actual cooking. The grandmother clock in the hall had struck midnight, and I trudged up to bed and jumped under the covers. Outside, the wind had picked up and could be heard whistling between the houses. Inside, Ramon snored away like a Bulgarian sailor. Despite the racket, I settled in, looking forward to a good night's sleep. Soon, I began to drift off. Not too long after that, right before complete sleep took hold of me, I sat bolt upright in bed, jarred awake by a loud crash from downstairs. It sounded like something, perhaps a chandelier, had crashed to the floor in the dining room. "Did you hear that?" I called out in the darkness, afraid to move, but listening as Ramon stirred. "Yeah," he answered groggily. "Something fell. Go see what it was." I grabbed the Louisville Slugger near the side of the bed and crept downstairs after flicking the lights on in the stairwell. In the foyer, all was quiet. Nothing appeared out of order, so I cautiously entered the dining room and hit the light switch. But nothing appeared out of place. I jumped a bit as the window suddenly began to rattle, no doubt jostled by the wind outside, and I went into the next room. In the butler's pantry, I remembered the incident with the dogs and the rattling door, and I opened it and peered down into the darkness. All was quiet, so I walked through the butler's pantry and into the kitchen, where I searched for the source of the noise. Eventually, I returned back through the coat room and through the foyer into the front parlor. With bright lights illuminating the room, it became apparent that nothing was amiss. I scratched my head, doused the lights, and headed back upstairs. Could it have been the house settling or something like that? Back under the covers, I snuggled in and enjoyed the warmth, thankful that I didn't have to be outside in the weather. After tossing and turning several times, I realized that I had missed my opportunity. I wasn't tired anymore, and it would probably take me another hour or 2 for me to fall asleep. Listening to the wind roar outside, I lay there and I tried to come up with ways to induce slumber. I thought about the menu for tomorrow night's dinner. I went over decorating plans for the house in my head. I enumerated all the things that needed to be fixed and debated what should be fixed first. The bathroom on the second floor needed some major work, but there were still crumbling chimneys on the outside and the roof that needed attention before they collapsed and killed someone. The back part of the roof was looking pretty rough as well. Nearly an hour passed that way, but I wasn't any closer to sleep than before. Suddenly, another loud crash emanated from the room immediately below the dining room, and the floorboards seemed to shudder. It sounded as if a piece of furniture, perhaps the armoire in the dining room, had been tipped over and fell to the ground. I could hear Ramon as he groaned a bit in his sleep and turned to one side. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. straining my ears for further noises. "Yes," he answered groggily. "Something fell. Go see what it was." Louisville slugger in hand, I stole out of the bedroom past the dogs. They had also become alarmed at the noise and rose from their spots on the padded bench at the foot of the bed, and I snuck quietly down the back stairs. Down in the coat room, I listened in the dark for more activity. Other than the wind outside, all was still. On tiptoes, I crept into the butler's pantry and doubled back into the dining room, reaching my hand out for the light switch on the wall. Holding my breath, I slowly turned on the chandelier, my eyes adjusting as they wandered from the large armoire against the wall to the marble-top buffet and then the walnut fireplace mantel. Everything looked fine again. After scanning the room a second time, I walked across creaking floorboards into the foyer and turned on the lights. Nothing had tipped over there either. In the parlor and the kitchen, it was the same. A cold draft hit my bare feet as they slid across the icy tiles, and I approached the back door. I opened it and looked outside. The stark light of a street lamp in the alley illuminated the entire rear of the house, and nothing seemed out of place. I closed the door and went quickly to the front of the house, where I quietly pulled the front door open and found myself standing on the porch. Other than bare branches rattling in the wind, 3rd Street was desolate of any activity until the cold air whipped up an empty plastic grocery bag and sent it fluttering down the sidewalk. My feet chilled from the cold concrete. I went back inside and closed the door. Still trying to find something to explain the strange sound, I ran up to the 3rd floor and took a gander, but nothing appeared out of place. Then I trotted back down to the 2nd floor and checked the 2 rooms at the front of the house before peering inside the bathroom on my way to the little room at the back of the structure. And as I opened the door, I turned on the light. Everything was fine, except for the freezing cold in the space that caught me off guard. Since there were 3 exposed walls, it shouldn't have been surprising, but I wasn't expecting it. An old wooden tambour clock ticked away on the mantel, its round face showing it was almost 1:30 as I slowly studied the silvery numbers. Realizing I was finally starting to get tired again, I closed the door and returned to the bedroom. Fritz had wriggled himself out from under the blankets and shadowed me, but Bess and Rocky were still standing on the settee at the foot of the bed. I picked them up and bundled them under the covers, convincing myself that I was imagining things. It was time to go to sleep, so I snuggled in and let myself relax, looking forward to dreams about the dinner party the next evening. Although I didn't succumb to sleep entirely, I lay in a deeply relaxed state for another half hour or so before a third loud crash reverberated through the downstairs. Again, I had the impression that it came from the dining room. The dogs stuck their sleepy heads out from under the covers and gave me confused looks. I asked Ramon if he had heard the noise again. "Yes," he answered groggily. "Something fell. Go see what it was." Bat in hand, I steadily made my way down to the dining room and flipped on the light. But instead of finding a piece of furniture tipped over, I saw the table perfectly laid out for my party the next evening. In the foyer, the grandmother clock provided me my only solace, a steady tick-tock that echoed quietly through the shining woodwork. Light from the chandelier reflected in the crystal champagne flutes and gleamed in the polished silver on the table as I scrutinized the dining room. All was fine. More determined than before, I quickly went from room to room and turned on the lights, and then out the front and back doors where everything looked to be in place. Before double-checking the upper floors, I remembered the basement and opened the small door under the back stairs, my eyes trained on the darkness at the bottom of the steps. Slowly, I followed the creaky stairs down to the washroom and pulled a string that illuminated a lone bare bulb in the ceiling. Then I listened. The wind still howled outside, but in the basement silence reigned for the most part. I checked the 3 adjacent cellar rooms and found nothing to arouse suspicion. It was a typical basement in an old Victorian house, utilitarian and inherently scary, and it exuded the sense of foreboding that is part and parcel of old underground rooms. The more I stood and examined the drab walls of stone and brick and the wispy cobwebs dangling from the bare rafters, the more my sense of unease increased. I was freaking myself out. So I ran up the stairs and closed the door. After checking the second and third floors another time, I found myself back under the covers, once more hoping to finally get some sleep. Outside, 2 people, no doubt they were patrons leaving one of the neighborhood bars, began yelling in the back alley. From the face of the digital clock next to the bed, I could see it was almost 2:30. And after a quick calculation, I realized there was still a chance of getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep, so I concentrated on relaxing my feet and working up to my head. But every time I got to my stomach, I started to think about the tart I had made for dessert the following evening. I debated sneaking downstairs to help myself to one of the extras I had made. In addition, a block of 12-year-old cheddar cheese I'd brought back from a recent trip home to Wisconsin seemed to be calling my name. My stomach emitted a long, painful growl. 15 minutes later, my thoughts finally got off food, and I was relieved to feel my eyelids drooping. I pulled the covers tight around me and began to drift off. Crash! The crack of breaking glass made me jump out of bed. It sounded like a window pane had broken. I could hear large shards falling to the hardwood floors. All 3 of the dogs stirred, and a growling Fritz made for the foot of the bed. Did you hear that? Gripping the Louisville Slugger tightly, I rushed over to Ramon and flipped on the light. Yes, he answered groggily. Something. Yeah, I know, I said. Something fell. Go see what it was. You go see what it was. I poked him with the baseball bat. I'm too tired, he groaned and turned over. Stop being such a hobo. A second large crash echoed downstairs, again sounding like a broken window, and I could hear something like a large stone or brick bouncing across the parquet floor. He called me a hobo again. After several seconds of silence, it happened a third time. The loud sound of breaking glass finally causing Ramon to right himself from the bed and listen. Are those windows breaking? He whispered. I think somebody's trying to break in. My voice quavered as I nervously picked up the cell phone and prepared to call 911. From downstairs came another loud noise and the sound of broken glass falling to the floor. It sounded like stones were hitting the ground as well. Ramon got up from the bed and snatched an aluminum bat leaning up against the wall on his side. 2 seconds later, we were both inching our way down the front stairs. At the bottom of the steps, I quickly hit the switch and the foyer flooded with light. The face of the grandmother clock indicated that it was just 3:30 as we cautiously entered the dining room, which was empty. Ramon went to the back of the house and I searched the front, but everything seemed to be fine. After putting on some shoes and hurrying around the outside of the house, I checked the basement while Ramon scoured the top floors. Nothing. With all the lights on, we went from window to window on the ground floor, examining the panes for cracks or any signs of breakage. Then we checked all the remaining windows in the house and found not so much as a hairline fracture. What had made those sounds? We turned off all the lights and cut through the foyer to ascend the steps to the second floor, but as we passed the grandmother clock, I realized that the tick-tocking had stopped. I looked at the face of the timepiece and was surprised to discover that it still read 3:30, even though the cell phone in my hand indicated that it was 3:50. The weights hadn't even descended halfway down, so I was at a loss to explain why the mechanism had simply stopped. Anxious to get back to a warm bed, I quickly opened the door and reset the hands before pulling up the weights and setting the pendulum in motion. With the comforting tick-tock behind me, I made for the bedroom. Maybe it came from the neighbor's house or something, said Ramon, already tucked in under the covers. But it sounded like it came from the dining room, I answered. like all the other sounds before. I turned and looked into the darkness of the hallway, half expecting something to emerge from the shadowy recesses of the staircase. If you ask me, something weird is going on in this house. Humph. With that, Ramon promptly fell asleep, and his loud snoring resumed. Standing near the open bedroom door, I could still hear the clock ticking away in the foyer, and a moment later, a series of 4 deep, melodious chimes marked the hour. Tiredness stung my eyes, and my shoulders ached with tension, so I went to bed, pressed my eyes shut, and willed myself to sleep. I'd be lucky to get 3 hours. The wind roaring outside, I cushioned my head against the pillows. Eventually, I dozed. Boom! Sometime later, a loud thud sounded from downstairs someplace. Groggily, I reached for the cell phone and saw that it was 5:10. Ramon stirred a bit, but then I heard nothing. I debated getting up to check on the noise, but I soon decided against it. Why go downstairs if I was going to find nothing anyway? I closed my eyes and tried to recapture sleep. Sometime later, there was another dull thud. My eyes snapped wide open, and a silent curse formed on my lips. I grabbed the cell phone and saw it was 6 o'clock on the dot. Ramon started mumbling something, and although I couldn't understand every word, the essence of it was, something fell. Go see what it was. As adrenaline rushed through my veins, it became crystal clear that I was not meant to get any sleep this day. I stoically pushed back the covers and gave an unsatisfying stretch. Through the window, next to the bed, the faintest sliver of rose and yellow appeared above the horizon, signaling the waning bit of darkness. The sun would be up soon, so I might as well get out of bed and start the day with a cup of strong black coffee. Leaving Rocky and Bess in their warm nest, Fritz dutifully followed me as I trudged downstairs to grind some beans. My hand on the rail as I descended the stairs at the front of the house, I could hear the neighborhood slowly coming to life. Outside, a car door slammed, and several vehicles sped by on 3rd Street. I opened the drapes over the window in the foyer to let in a bit of light, but it was still mostly dark outside. On the sidewalk, a neighbor was walking her dog. I turned on a small floor lamp and headed back to the kitchen, eager for the first cup of coffee. But as I cut through the darkened dining room and pushed my way through the swinging door into the butler's pantry, my shin struck something hard and I grimaced in pain. I reached out for the light switch and turned it on. Rubbing the part of my leg under my knee with the other hand, I tried to figure out what was going on. There in front of me, one of the dining room chairs blocked the doorway. Nonplussed, I stared, then grabbed it and turned to put it back in its place at the table. And that's when I froze, failing to comprehend the scene before me. "Ramon!" I yelled. "Come down here right now!" And that's how we're going to end tonight's reading, another cliffhanger in Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. So what did I find in the butler's pantry? Okay, so our next chapter we'll do tomorrow night is Josephine. And some people in the neighborhood, people who've been on the Victorian Ghost Walk, they know who Josephine is. But this tells a little about how I got to find out about her. But so any questions before we wrap things up tonight? Oh, and by the way, if you didn't tell us what you're drinking, let us know what you're drinking. I'm doing Evan Williams. And good to see you all tonight. Once again, I saw some of you were on Amazon and gave me some nice reviews of True Ghost Stories and Eerie Legends for America's Most Haunted Neighborhood, the first readings we did, and also for Voodoo Days. So thanks a lot. Like I said, that really helps an author a lot if you can go on and give us a nice review. Abby, you did such a great review. Thanks a lot. And a couple of others, I saw some really nice reviews. So thanks a lot. It really, really helps an author if we can get people going on and giving 5-star reviews. It takes 10 minutes for you. You don't probably think it does a lot, but seriously, for authors, it's one of the best things you can do, besides buying books and things like that. But Sean Stafford, once again, he's helping us redo our website. Hopefully, when this is all over and done with, you can all come and take some tours. I got one of our T-shirts on tonight. Thanks, Carrie Sweet, for the wonderful design. We're working on, like a group T-shirt and some other things. So just stay tuned. We got another 2 weeks before we're done with this. And when we're done with this, I'll read a couple nights I can take and read the opening chapters of the true crime book I was telling you about the other night, The House in Old Louisville, which looks like it's probably going to be called Murder in Glitterball City. But thanks for tuning in tonight. And I really look forward to turning this on every night at 9 o'clock and seeing all these old familiar faces and all these new faces. Like I said, get your friends, join, share the video if you can. The more views I can get on it, the more it helps me on Facebook. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I like the shirt too. And we're going to have all kinds of different colors and schemes. So this is for America's grandest Victorian neighborhood. There's going to be one like this for America's most haunted neighborhood. There's going to be a number of things coming. So just stay tuned and we'll let you know. I'll tell Ramon, hi, Ashley, thanks. But yeah, so tomorrow night we're going to continue. We're going to do the chapter about Josephine. She was a mysterious figure I kept seeing in the neighborhood. And she's kind of like the wild goose. I'm always trying to figure out what is going on with her. And stay tuned because Ramon called me a hobo, but I actually meet a real-life hobo in the neighborhood. And I find out about the neighborhood's voodoo past, the gypsy past that connects the neighborhood to some interesting stories, and find out more about the house. More things continue to happen in the house, and we have more dinner parties and lots of good food. So thanks a lot. Hey, Amy. There's VG again. So like I said, it's really good to see everyone checking in every night. So bring some friends tomorrow night. Friday night's going to be a good night. And bring your bourbon. And we're going to get through this all together. Hopefully, wouldn't it be wonderful by the time I finish this is all over and done with. And we're back to going out in public and back to our jobs and things like that. And like I said, if you miss a night, don't worry. These are all available on my Facebook page. You can still watch them. And then Louisville Historic Tours has a YouTube channel. And all these things are on our YouTube channel for Louisville Historic Tours. And thanks to Sean Stafford, like I said, for doing a lot of that. Okay? So good seeing you all tonight. Take care. Love you all. And we will see you tomorrow night for lucky number 13. Tomorrow night's going to be our 13th night together. So take care and see you later. Bye-bye.